Good morning. It's Monday, May 14th, 9 a.m. This is the Muscatine County Board of Supervisors. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First is review the agenda.
Move to approve as presented.
Motion by Jeff, second by Matt. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next is receive comments from the public. Do we have anyone that would like to step forward and approach the board? Seeing no one come forward, we'll move on. Item number 4, items with planning and zoning administrator Eric Furness. Morning, Eric. Morning. First is discussion and possible action to authorize an additional full-time building inspector for the zoning, building, environmental office.
Yes, included in your packet is a memo with a little bit of information. I'm requesting to add one full-time inspector. This is, as you're aware, a combination inspector position. Our building inspector that we currently have covers every phase of residential construction, and now we will be working on commercial and industrial inspections due to recent changes that we've made here at the county level. So those projects will be under our purview as well. We've had significant increase in construction activity since the first of the year as compared to the same period last year, January 1 to about the middle of May, which is usually a very good indicator of how things are going to go. Overall permit activity is up 44% from the same time period last year. Spring, as you know, is when people bring in their blueprints, when they're ready to break ground on new constructions, on additions once the winter passes, and so there's usually projects in waiting each spring. So 44% increase on total permits of all types. That's housing, pole barns, detached garage, wells, septics, room additions, new construction. Something that I find very encouraging, though, is during that same time period, new home permits out the door during this time period are up 200% from the same time period last year. So we had a good group of people waiting for the winter to pass. They've got started. The contractors are very busy out in Muscatine County, and this is creating a lot of work for us. As you're aware, that once a new home is permitted, there are multiple inspections over the next 6 to 9 months to a year, in addition to all the other inspections that we're trying to keep on top of as well. So I am asking to add one additional staff position to help with the inspections.
So this was actually more than just to cover the onerous high fees that the city was putting on the people that we led over to them for the commercial side. This is more than just that. We had an actual need internally as well, correct?
Right. We're seeing activity, yes, residential activity. I haven't had, I've had just interest in one industrial project so far since we took over that. But I'm speaking mostly the workload has been increasing, has been residential.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, but that's good because it'll help us cover the cost of.
Oh, obviously, yes. I mean, our revenue would increase with each permit. It should offset the majority of that cost.
Not bad.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
I got a motion by Jeff, a second by Nathan. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Next with Eric is action to set a public hearing for Monday, June 4th, 2018 at 9 a.m. on a request to rezone approximately 42 acres in Sweetland Township from A1 Ag District to R1 Residential District.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Bob, second by Jeff. Tell me again where this parcel is.
This parcel is just east of the Mecca-Seba
I know where it is
area,
now. I know where it is.
and up on top of the bluff.
Okay, I know exactly where it is.
There was one other rezoning case that was tabled as well, so we had 2 rezonings. This one was recommended.
Do we know yet, have we heard in these, are these residential subdivisions that they're proposing, or do we know?
Well, we often get this is my intent for why I want to rezone. This is rezoning 42 plus or minus acres. The potential buyer has indicated that their desire is to just place one house and have kind of a family farmstead for his wife and kids. He's indicated he has no desire to do a subdivision there. However, anytime we look at rezoning, you have to assume that's, that potential is there, and is this property ideal for conversion to residential, whether it be a single house or 20 houses. So that's what the zoning commission looks at when they recommend a rezoning.
In A1, you can build a residence as long as you meet setbacks, right?
We have a process for building that does not require rezoning to R1. It's a special use permit that can be granted by the Board of Adjustment for a rural residence. They look at a number of criteria and carefully consider each application on a case-by-case basis, look at separation distance, proximity to existing city limits or existing residential areas, paved roads, adequate separation from large livestock confinement facilities, that type of thing. But yes, there is a process for that.
Yeah, how's it currently being used? Is it pasture or what?
CRP and timber. It's literally, it's up on the bluff.
Gotcha.
above Highway 22. This particular property.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just adjacent to Mekaseba, if I remember back up top on the side.
Correct.
It meets the minimum CSR requirements.
Well, I don't really want to get into too much. Probably isn't proper to get into deliberation on the, outside of a public hearing setting on the rezoning request. This is just setting the public hearing date. So I will certainly have all that information that is normally part of that discussion at that time, Matt.
Okay. I've got a motion by Bob and a second by Jeff. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Anything else, Eric?
I don't believe so.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Next is items with County Engineer Keith White. Good morning, Keith.
Good morning. Have two permits this morning. The first is from Interstate Power and Light, which is an Alliant Energy company out of Cedar Rapids. And theirs is basically working the right of way to cap off a gas main on Wiggins Road or near Wiggins Road. One end near 2672 Stewart, the other end near the Monsanto Butterfly Park. As you recall, they have a permit to construct a new gas main down there, so apparently they're abandoning one too. So that's that one. The second is from Liberty Communications in West Liberty, Iowa. This is a continuation of work. We already approved a permit for a fair amount of fiber optic work. And this is fiber optic cable on portions of Atwood, 130th, 140th, 155th, Bancroft, Burkett, Clark, and Davis. And I will note the work that they've done on their contractor has performed on their first permit has been pretty good versus some of our other experiences.
Sounds like all good with both of them then.
I'll second.
Who had the motion?
Matt.
Matt. Had a motion by Matt, a second by Jeff. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Anything else, Keith?
The only thing to report, the project out on Zachary and Old 61 is complete and open, totally open, and I think they did a pretty good job.
Nice job on that hump. Real nice
Yeah.
job. Yeah.
So
Very good.
that's all I additionally had.
All right, thank you, Keith.
You bet.
Next is update with Community Services Director Kathy Anderson. Good morning, Kathy.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I just passed out our financials at the end of April, and we're on target in all of our areas. The top page is general assistance. So we'll be coming in most likely under budget. Then the second page is mental health. And again, we are below our target. So, you know, we've got a couple of areas that are a little higher, but bottom line, looks like we're going to be coming in below our target, so. Last month, you asked me some questions about the homeless shelter rent and the shelter coordinator and the shelter services, and what our budget amount this year for MCSA for the coordinator and shelter services. Total is $53,172. So far, what we've paid in rent is $92,851, which is higher than last year. And so far, the numbers are we've served 267 adults and 92 children at the end of April. The FY17 rate was 315 adults and 90 children at the end of July. So over the next 2 months, it looks like if we're going to continue at the rates that we are, we're going to be a little higher than that. Beginning in 17 and 18, there was a gap. We funded self-pay clients. Everybody at MCSA is asked to pay, and you know, if they can. So we had a gap between $5 and $13 a night. The rate for MCSA in the gym is $13 a night. And so we paid up to $5 if the person couldn't pay at all, as of last year. Then between 5 and 13, we didn't pay anything, which didn't really make sense. You know, so if let's say if the person could pay $8, then we'd pay $5 and on up to $13. If they can self-pay, they self-pay. If they can't, you know, based on their income and based on what's going on in their lives, then we do provide that assistance. So there was a gap. And so that's really the main reason that we're paying more at MCSA this year, because we're closing that gap. A couple other things factors into that. You know, it depends on how long a person stays, depends on if they're in the family shelter or the gym. Most of the gentlemen in the dorm upstairs, we don't help usually because they have an income. That's one of the criteria for living up there. You know, there's a few instances where we may provide some assistance for those folks up there. When a person presents to the shelter, the first week we fund that because, you know, they're at the shelter for a reason. They're not there because they're checking into a hotel. And so, you know, if we have more of those cases, you know, where we're funding that first week, you know, you're going to see the rents a little higher. Folks that are there long-term, they're working with that shelter coordinator to come up with a plan. And sometimes that involves them saving money so that when they move out, they can pay for rent, they can pay for a deposit on a place, they can pay a utility deposit. And so, you know, so if you're looking at folks that are there longer term, that are able to contribute more to their stay, that also affects the rent. So does that answer your questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So last year, when there was a gap between the $5 and the $13, were we having an issue with people being displaced because of that gap?
No, not at all.
Okay, so why are we paying more then?
We're paying more because it makes sense for us to do that. Because if, you know, I think the gap was one of those things where as their rates rose, we didn't keep pace with that. And so it was just one of those situations where, well, this is what we've always done. And then last year, Mike and Charla took a look at it. And, you know, they had a change in in leadership at MCSA when Charla took over. Charla comes from a banking perspective and was able to look more at their costs and at their needs. And, you know, she and Mike met about that and came to terms that, okay, if you're going to self-pay, if you got folks that can self-pay, and you've paid up to $5, but the cost is $13, and we would do that with any provider, you know, looking at their cost and adjusting what we pay according to their cost if it's reasonable.
Hey, Kathy, this is more of a budget question. If I look at rent and rent MCSA, I don't know if this is a budgeting issue or what happened, but looks to me like we budgeted about $90,000 a year for this year for rent assistance, and we're at about 102 spend already.
Right.
So
And
we're a pretty big miss there. And then, so what's your projected impact for the rest of the year on that? Are we gonna come in, you know, and where's that money coming from?
yeah, actually, if you look at the bottom line for GA assistance, we are at 72% with a target of 83%. So even if we spend more in rent, we're still going to be fine, the bottom line.
Where does it come from? What do we not spend on then?
Well, if you look at some of the things that we're not spending much on, things like medical, doctor, hospital, prescriptions, funeral, you know, we're at 19% for funeral this year. So the money comes out of your total GA assistance budget. So, and next year, we have budgeted more for rent. You know, this rent is something that we are assisting more people with. We are also below on things like a bit below on food, and we're below on electric assistance and gas utilities. So, you know, it balances out in the end. And we're going to try, you know, Sherry and I have met when we did our budget this year, and we're looking at coming closer to the numbers that we actually are providing the assistance. And of course, it's, you know, you can't always predict everything.
So we go back to history on this, when this board was asked to fund these positions, and one thing that's concerning me is I see this cost creep every year. And, you know, one of the whole notions was this shelter case coordinator and shelter, I don't remember what the names were, but that we're trying to help people learn to budget. We're trying to help
Right.
get people out of the shelter so they're not continually a burden on the county finances. So,
Sure.
you know, where are we at on that and what's being done? It sounds to me like we're just spending more money, quite frankly. And we're not, I mean, are we seeing any results? Do we have, you know, any cases where we can point to where we've been able to get people off of assistance? I'm kind of puzzled as to why we're seeing more and more need. You know, I hear it in the food pantry, I hear it in the shelter, and yet I'm on workforce boards, and, you know, we can't hire enough people. We got work everywhere. So what's going on? It just doesn't correlate.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors out there, and you know, to be able to pinpoint and say specifically what all of those factors are is pretty difficult. You know, I will say that what we are paying for the program or the shelter coordinator and the shelter services has not increased since 16-17 and did not also increase in 19. So we are actually, what we're paying for is the rent itself. What we're paying more for is the rent itself. We're not paying more for...
That's all just a blended cost. I mean, rent is a function of overhead too.
Sure.
So I mean, those dollars are in there. I guess my concern is that, you know, I hear it's hard, you know, I guess that's why they call it work. But, you know, what are we doing about it? You know, what
Yeah.
are the programs? What are our goals? How are we gonna
Yeah.
get, you know, I don't wanna spend $200,000 next year on rent assistance. What, you know,
Right.
what's the end game here? How are we helping these people? What are their barriers? You know, I'd like to see information on that and what we're doing about it, because I think it says that, you know, the definition of insanity is doing the same old things and
Sure.
expecting different results. So-
Sure. Well, I know that, you know, MCSA has implemented some new things this year. They have the welding program where they've had some people that have gone through that. They're in their second round of welding classes where they're actually having an MCC instructor come and teach people to weld. They had several people go through that first round, and I believe that at least 2 of them are working someplace and are not living in the shelter anymore. I'd have to get specifics on that. As I said, they're starting another one. MCSA has acquired the 4th Street building, the little house across the street from our office, where they've got apartments to help people transition, from the shelter into apartments. There's a lot of factors, of course. You have mental health, you've got substance abuse issues that people face, you've got, as far as the workforce and jobs available, you have gaps between what skills employers need and what skills people have. And, there's a lot of thought about how do you teach people to work, to show up every day, make sure your hygiene's right, to have those skills, the people skills that you need to keep your employment where you don't tell your boss off. If you're asked to do something at work, you do it. So, that's really a whole nother issue as far as work and jobs go. And, I think that's an area where there's a lot of need, especially with some of our GA folks.
Yeah, and so I look at that, and I also, there's a lot of federal funding that comes in around through workforce development, woke rehab, and so I guess my question, and what I hope to see out of this is, we're spending a lot of money, so what are we doing?
Right.
What's working? What's not working? And what are we doing to move the ball forward? Or
Right.
are we just going to continue to do things the way we've always done them? That's my question. And maybe you can't answer that.
My question on the rent was kind of where Jeff went, was if there wasn't a problem, why are we spending more?
Well, there was a problem in that they
just
had
said
that gap.
We're not displaced because of,
They weren't displaced, but the costs at MCSA, they weren't meeting their cost. I mean, they weren't kicking people out. They don't do that.
It was a fairness issue.
Sure. To Jeff's point, I'm curious. I have no way to judge success on these programs because I have no information to tell me the length of time that individuals are being assisted, the number of people that have transitioned out of and are employed, the number of people that are still in a position of need of assistance for a period of what time, be it months or years or whatever. I've never seen any type of that information to know where the bars are being set at and if we actually are making progress or not. How many people are actually employable, so on and so forth. So I have never seen information that tells me the amount of people that have gone through this help station, I'll call it,
Okay.
and have progressed on in their life and made a positive impact for themselves, their lives, their families, and the community.
Yeah, I can't, if you tell me you've held a couple of classes in welding and 2 people have gotten a job, doesn't sound like terrific success to me. Maybe we should be offering basket weaving. I don't know
Well,
what's.
not everybody's gonna be a welder.
Well, that's the point.
Right.
My point is how do we, why welding? Is it just because it's an offering at MCC? Is there something that's we'd have more success with? I don't know what the data tells me. I don't know what the
Well-
demographics of the people that are here are. The other thing is, and this would be just a personal thing, if I'm gonna pay for you to go to a class, then by God, you're gonna use that knowledge and you're gonna go out and get a job, or I'm not paying for it. Whether you want to or not, that's not a matter. If you're taking my help, you're gonna use it.
And just to clarify, we didn't pay for people to go to that class. That came from other funds at MCSA. And in terms of, gathering data. You know, the ability to gather a lot of specific data that gets fairly sophisticated, and our charge is to see if people meet eligibility requirements under what the county guidelines are, under what the state guidelines are, and provide that assistance accordingly. So gathering some of the data that you're talking about at this point is probably not something that we can easily do at community services. You know, maybe the bigger question is maybe MCSA can provide more of that specific information.
Kathy, regarding that line of thought, so,
Yeah.
but you can answer some of these questions probably.
Yeah.
And that, for example, I know that MCSA has some long-term tenants, that I would call them that. Now, are those folks, they have jobs, right?
Some have jobs, some are on disability.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, maybe inviting Charla Schaefer to come and speak might be helpful. She can probably talk to some of the specifics about specific folks
I think that's a good idea.
that are there.
And Jeff, we probably have had some of this information given to us in the past. I know myself, there's been a lot of things over the years brought to us, and I don't retain all that. A refresher course would be good.
Well, I would think that whatever community services charge is, its ultimate charge is to help as many people as possible. And it seems to me that having that kind of data would enable us to do that more effectively over time. So question number one, are these data available both currently and historically? And question two, if not, what do we need to change in order to make sure that you guys
Right.
are set up to gather this information on a reliable basis?
Well, I mean, we can gather unduplicated numbers that we serve. And, you know, then the question becomes, so let's say we help Joe in September, and then Joe is able to move out, do something else, but something bad happens to Joe in May. He comes back to the shelter in May. So the question is that an unduplicated? Is it episodic? You know, how do you want the information? Or do we say, we helped Joe twice?
But can't you pull up Joe's history of assistance with a few keystrokes?
We can pull up his history of assistance as far as putting the data into report. I mean, I'm sure the capability is there. You know, I'm going to be working with Sherry Seawright on things that we can pull from Eden. That doesn't necessarily translate into specific people that we've helped. We do have our CSN system, and you know, the ability to gather specific reports like that. You know, we would have to design reports, and we could. You know, that could be something we can work on, and it just depends on what it is that you want to see. Do you want to see if we help someone, let's say if we help them with rent, food and utilities, if we help them 6 times a year, if we help them once a year, is that what you're wanting to see?
Well, I think the first step is to compile all the data points you have into a database. And then from that, we can probably run reports and see what type of further and additional information we might want, whether it's possible to correlate it from that database or whether it would be necessary to gather other data points. I mean, I think the measure of how effective this program is not how much money we spend, but how many folks we help. I think we all agree on that. So, yeah, sitting here, I don't know that any of us is an expert in determining how to tell from the data how best someone is helped.
Right.
But I think if you guys can come up with an idea of how to determine if someone's life has changed, if someone, I think, ultimately, if they needed assistance, now they no longer do.
Right.
If you have some way of measuring that, however imperfect it may be, that I think will be the first step toward generating the comprehensive data we need to evaluate the program effectively on an ongoing basis.
And
Okay.
something that I want to see, or hear again, you've probably been told years ago, I know these things change, we always have to adapt to them, and that is what services MCSA provides that takes care of our responsibilities for mandated services by
Sure.
the state. I need my memory refreshed on that, and if there's been changes, what they were.
Okay, all right. You know, and you know, that kind of leads me to the numbers don't tell all of our story, you know, as you guys are well aware. And sometimes it's difficult to glean from numbers You know, you can say, well, we paid for 266 people to be at MCSA this year. We served, we did 283 food sacks so far this year to date. But that doesn't tell the whole story about what we do. You know, that doesn't tell you about the afternoon that I had a visit from a police officer who was called to a local business because there was a woman that was coming in and she was confused and her hygiene was poor and he didn't know what to do. So he came into my office and we were able to, pull one of our neighbors in from the Department of Human Services and talk about some things. Pulled in my trust social worker to talk about how we could possibly help this situation. And in the end, we ended up becoming a public guardian for this person, and this person is now in a safe environment. So those are the stories that don't necessarily translate into numbers. Or, the conversation that I had with the family of a mentally ill adult child, talking about what my options are. And, this person's been hospitalized, but they're not any better. And what can we do and where can we find help? So those are things that community services does that we don't, always translate into, okay, there's my number, here's my success story. But, we want to have success stories, and yes, we want to be able to show you success stories. I think we're just trying to figure out how best to do that.
The MCSA, they're our only shelter provider?
Yes. Other than domestic violence, but that's under MCSA as well. And I'll tell you, I've worked in a county where we don't have a homeless shelter, and sometimes your option, if somebody presents homeless, is to house somebody in a hotel, and that's not a very good option. And one of the measures you can probably, and it's more anecdotal, but are you guys getting calls about people sleeping under the bridge or in the parks or things like that? That's one way to gauge if shelter is there and it's a worthwhile endeavor to fund.
Well, I really understand what Jeff was asking regards to how we gauge this help and how we have more jobs and yet
Right.
numbers are staying up there for people needing shelter. So I just think we need to get some answers there because it'll help us do a better job.
Absolutely.
Do a better job.
Absolutely. The other thing that, just to shift gears a little bit, that you asked about last month was our number of mental health and substance abuse commitments and how that compares with the other counties in our region. So far in April, am I too loud?
That's all right. It's not your fault.
Okay. Okay, so in April, we had 18 total commitments, 11 of which were mental health, and 2 were dual, mental health and substance abuse, and then 1 just substance abuse, and there were 48-hour holds. The numbers, how everybody tracks their numbers, isn't always necessarily uniform, and that's something that we're working on as a region. So Scott County, their year-to-date numbers, which would be from July 1st of 17 through April 30th of 18, Scott County was at 238, mental health 124 substance. Clinton was at 121 mental health and substance combined, so they're tracking them combined, whereas Scott County separates them out. Cedar was 29 combined. Jackson was 30 mental health, 6 substance abuse, and so far through April, we were at 78 mental health, 40 substance abuse, and 17 dual. So we're very close to what Clinton has, which, I think that's probably a pretty accurate measure because we're about the same size county as Clinton. So when we look at our region, you've got Scott, that's a big county. You've got Clinton and Muscatine that are our middle-sized counties, and then you've got Jackson and Cedar, which are our smaller counties. So, there's not, it's pretty average throughout the region based on population. In order to kind of help reduce commitments, reduce some of those costs, we have our crisis system through the region, And in Muscatine, Trinity Robert Young has the staff in the emergency department and the community-based care coordinator. The community-based care coordinator's a new one. She's been on a couple of months, and I have scheduled monthly meetings with the emergency department coordinator and the community-based care coordinator to discuss, you know, if people are presenting at the hospital, what kind of services are they getting on the backside? What can you refer them to? If they're committed, you know, we want to make sure that we've got them referred to the IHH program or any other, you know, outpatient therapy so that we don't see subsequent commitments. The region is also going to meet next week to look at the requests, the one-time funding requests from providers for various things. Now there'll be a work session on the 22nd. The governing board is meeting on the 24th. Regionally, we're also looking on determining an assessment tool for regional services that we fund. So if somebody comes into my office and says, you know, I'm not on a waiver, I need supported community living, or I need some type of vocational services, but I don't have a funding stream. And so we look at that, you know, we look at, well, are you on a waiting list? If you're on a waiting list for a waiver, unless it's an emergency situation, that's not something that we're going to fund. You know, we look at a lot of things on a case-by-case basis, but some things we're funding, like a residential care facility for folks that have maybe been hospitalized. The hospital is ready to discharge, but they're not ready to go back into the community. So sometimes we look at that. And just looking at, is there an assessment tool? The state's requiring regions to define an assessment tool. So we're looking at two tools. One is called the LOCUS for persons with mental illness. The other is the ICAP for persons with intellectual or developmental disabilities. So we'll be looking at implementing those and working through an assessment to determine, okay, maybe you're needing a week in an RCF, or maybe 2, or maybe longer, or maybe in terms of like a work assistance program, sheltered work. Okay, maybe you can work in the community, just not full time. So maybe we'll fund you half time at Crossroads, that sort of thing. Just gives you a little more definitive method to determine what people's service needs are. And then we already talked about the financials and the budget. And do you have any questions?
I don't think I have any other questions, but just to be clear, when you're putting this information together, I want to make sure that you bring some information to us in regard to the number of people that you've been able to guide into helping themselves more in a financial way.
Okay.
That's what I want to know.
Okay.
That in my mind is a real piece of success in having a person or a party be able to make their own lives better, their families' lives better,
Sure.
and that normally is through better decision making, an increase in personal income.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want to know.
Okay. Okay.
I want to be clear on that.
All right.
Anything else, board?
Thanks, Kevin.
With that, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Okay. With that, next is discussion and possible action to approve the minutes of the May 7, 2018 regular meeting.
Second.
Motion by Matt, second by Jeff. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Correspondence. Matt, what you got?
Still doing some follow-up on a call I had about the Coneville Cemetery, so
Okay.
we'll
Okay.
get something
Okay.
out of that.
Anything for you, Jeff?
Nothing to note.
I had nothing to note. Nathan?
I had one contact regarding some of the treatment of roads south of Nichols. I want to talk to Keith about after the meeting, if I could. And plus, I did forget to tell you this. I had some contact with some folks about the location of the food pantry and exploring some options for where that might be located in a beneficial way.
Okay. Bob?
Nothing.
How about committee reports, Bob?
Well, I really didn't have any committee reports. However, I met with new leadership of Senior Resources this past week. It was a meeting that I was going to have, prior to being out of town, so we were able to reschedule. And we discussed basically where both programs are at and who's responsible to the state government and who isn't. And they were new to the position, so I've scheduled a meeting with her and our new executive director at Milestones. And they'll get together in the near future here and see where we can do things together rather than separately, so we don't have duplication of services.
Who was locally, who was?
My understanding is that Joni Axel's accepted the position basically on a free gratis basis to help them out. But she's new to that particular arena, and
Awesome.
and I don't know why, but somebody gave her my name to talk with about it. So we started out. We're headed hopefully in a good direction.
Joni do a fantastic job.
She is. She's, they're at a little bit of a disadvantage from the standpoint of dollars and cents because they don't, they're not basically controlled in any way by state or federal government, other than they get some dollars.
They're a
but
service
they're not
provider, but
mandated
not a
to do
direct
that.
recipient of funds.
Right, but see, Milestones, we're mandated to do certain things. We've been chosen through that whole process about 6 years ago in order to service a particular area. And of course then too, they're just locally in Muscatine, which is a very giving community, and it's kind of helped supported them. I know years ago, they'd come with about a $3 million budget. My understanding is there ain't nowhere near that anymore. And we're running at about $5.5 million is what we've been reduced.
Milestones?
Yeah, we've been reduced to that basically based on some of the changes that the state has implemented. So, but I think it's going to be a good learning process for their group as well as our group. And I also think that there's some opportunities there, and that's what the directors are going to get their heads together and see what we can do so we don't duplicate services. Like, I explained to her a little bit, and she was a little surprised at how we have, the state wants you to make sure that your elderly have options. So just like on the food we talked about here a while ago, we may have 6 or 7 food providers that they can choose from. Well, no single food provider can hardly make ends meet when it's being divided 7 or 8 ways. So I think the state needs to go back and look at that. Options are good, but there's limitations, and she had no idea there was that many potential opportunities out there. And of course, when you go and you talk to, when your coordinators work with these folks in these places, homes and houses and whatever, they got to show them all the options. So,
Yeah.
that's part of the job. So anyway, I just wanted to bring you guys up
Okay.
to speed that something was being done in that area, and then we'll work forward with that.
Okay, Nathan, any committee reports?
Didn't have any committee meetings. Did get a lot of information about some of the grants and the requests that are going to be presented. I think Kathy mentioned on May 22nd to the mental health region. I think right now we're standing at 19 total requests that we're going through and looking at. So there's a lot of homework to do there, and that'll be our next step.
Okay. I did not have any committee reports. Jeff?
We'll do the easy one first. On the 9th, we had the meeting of the Muscom hiring committee, so we'll be interviewing candidates this week, so we're making progress forward there. I think the redo of our republication and redo of our job description helped a lot. We got a lot of really good candidates, so I'm very hopeful.
Wondered about that.
So that was good. The second thing, and I wanted to talk to the board and just mention it, was we had the meeting of the Watershed Management Authority on Tuesday, the 8th. And there was a request to bring to the boards for some funding, potential funding. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And, it's not really, the funding that they were asking was like $2,500 total, right, between all entities. And we discussed that because there were a number of issues that come up. There's a lot of grant funding available for these WMAs to do work and to do projects. And there have been some success. This came about because one of the grants you know, there's just administrative costs into putting it together. Now, Nature Conservancy wrote the original grant, which got us a direct, or a person to do work, and they're housing them, and they're not really being a problem, not saying anything, but this is something that the commissioners talked about. Probably long-term, we need to figure out how we're gonna do it, if we're gonna do it. Because another point that came up was, you know, they started talking about a checking account, and who would be on the checking account and all this, and, you know, personally, I have had some great concerns about that. I suggested that maybe they would endeavor down the path of maybe talking like somebody like the Community Foundation that would already have a nonprofit set up that could distribute funds and might be willing to do that kind of work. It would allow the Water Management Authority maybe to solicit private donations in a nonprofit manner too. So I think there's some benefit there instead of just going to the taxpayer dollar first, because I think there's some work that can be done that I think people are willing to participate in if they had some possibly recognition. So anyway, I just wanted to talk to everybody about it. You know, I think one of the initial concerns, and I mentioned this to the other commissioners, was, you know, one of the concerns about a lot of this that groups had was this will be another taxing entity and just another layer of tax and bureaucracy. And everybody's trying very hard and diligently to not have that become, because there are taxing entities on the board, but that board has no authority, no ability. But, you know, it could happen through grants, through others. So just something to think about. I think at some point we may be they may come and say, hey, we're looking for a commitment of something. As I think through it, you know, you basically have all the counties in the watershed. You have Scott, Cedar, Muscatine, Lynn, and Johnson all participating. And then there's a bunch of municipalities that are on the watershed. And it would make sense to me that maybe that if there were a fiduciary role, that maybe a county might do that. Or if there were funding, the county would look at it for these grant matches or something, or some matching entity. I don't know. It's just something to think about.
Refresh me on their mission.
This is to, the mission and vision are just about done, but basically in summary, it's improve water quality and mitigate flooding. And flood mitigation, those are the two kind of major points.
And do we have any other agency you're aware of that this deals with the same thing?
Well, you know, that's the problem, Bob, I think, is there are lots of agencies and lots of people, but I think this is probably an interesting approach because it looks at the watershed as a whole. And I would say that this is the lower Cedar we are, and the upper Cedar has done, you know, there's probably a lot more opportunity because what they're finding is projects at the headwaters are, you know, you get about 10 times the bang for the buck up there that you do in the lower. Really ours, they'd probably be focused more on flood mitigation, so maybe like wetlands preservation, buffer zones, things like that. So there was a lot of conversation about that, and it's primarily the funding that they're talking about is, you know, because we've had pretty good success, like conservation boards and CDs, is it conservation districts, soil and water conservation districts, have done a pretty good job with where there's like a in-kind matching, that they're able to do that and find that and manage that.
I'm just concerned about duplication work.
Right.
And services, because that happens so easy. Everybody means well, but once you have that, now you've got duplication of taxes, or, you know, you gotta get the money somewhere. Nobody works for free.
I think there were a couple of, like the initial one, the one of the grant, there's two grants they wanted to go after. One is just an awareness grant, which is the one that's relatively, but the big one, and it's a pretty significant grant, is, and they said they've had really good success getting all the SWDCs or all these water management authorities have gotten a pretty good planning grant. And what this planning grant has been used for is a study of the river, you know, what are the current nitrate levels, what are the background, what's the water quality background, I shouldn't say nitrate levels, all the water quality data, what are the water level information, some of that. Now I think the Cedar's we have some bonuses, maybe I would say, that the USGS has a water monitoring station and has since the 70s, I think, somewhere near the Nature Conservancy's property on the Cedar. So we have a lot of hydrologic data from, river levels and how quickly it rises
Well,
and all
Cedar,
that.
I always thought of the Cedar as being probably a river that's gonna give you less trouble from that standpoint, because it does a lot of self-filtration. I mean, you have so much sand, it's basically a sandy river altogether. So it does a lot of that self-filtration on its own.
I don't know if we have water quality data, but we have water level data, pretty good.
Well, now that fluctuates up and down pretty
Yeah.
good.
Well, that was interesting because they did a presentation, and, I think what Keith has said over time is that we're noticing that the flow rate on the Cedar has significantly increased over the years. I mean, it's flowing at probably 5 times what it did back in the 70s as far as rate of flow. And then the peak to peak is also much quicker. And I think Keith has attested to all that, said that those have become issues for us on roads. So it's it all says we're pinching the river in, we're shooting it down a smaller tube faster, and we probably need to create some buffer zones and do some work along the river.
The question I have, Jeff, is there any discussion on flood control projects farther up the river, as in flood control reservoirs and so on and so forth?
Well, we haven't talked about specific, but the Upper Cedar has a group as well. And that would be, I really haven't figured out how to link all that in. One of the things they talked about in this early grant money was a potential use for part of the planning grant as well would be possibly like a website with information. I don't know, the city of Muscatine did one I thought was kind of cool, where they pinpointed on a map where investment was being made and things that were being done. And then, a lot of these watershed people said, well, you gotta watch that, because, if it's private landowner, they gotta give from, so there's a lot of, it's kind of a dicey area. But, there are some good watershed things and water quality initiatives going on even in the county that people aren't maybe aware of. And this would be another mechanism to highlight those, just so people don't think, you commonly hear the ag community is really not concerned. Well, they are. They're spending a lot of time and effort trying to figure out, how do they contribute and what can they do. And this would be, if you had a public relations, kind of mechanism, you could highlight some of the things that are being done. Bioswells, biodigesters, all these kinds of things that they're doing that are having an effect on water quality.
Well, and the ag industry is doing a tremendous amount of work in regard to cover crop utilization and obviously no-till practices and numerous things, buffering and so on and so forth. So the ag community certainly has not been sitting on their hands, that's for certain. But I've spoke about this many times about the volume and of tile that have been put into the ground to help that drainage better, and of course the offall of that is quicker bounce on your water being dumped into these systems, and you're not going to end urban sprawl. They're always pouring concrete and laying blacktop, and so it's not something that's going to go away. It's something that's going to continue. And has to be addressed, and that's why I asked the question about flood control reservoirs farther up the river, because if you take a look at the drainage maps in the state and the amount of acres that drain into these river systems, it's absolutely huge.
Yeah, I know Cedar Rapids up in Lynn County, they did something, and I know on one of the tributaries to the Cedar, and they had some really great success, and it was basically that building, like low level, almost not levees, but berms, and to slow the water and give it a place for the water to flow out, to kind of to saturate the soil more and to slow.
Kind of a baffle.
Yeah, it's a baffle.
Kind of a baffle.
That's what they talked about.
Uh-huh.
So, early on, we're still getting through some of the formation, but not asking for anything today, but potentially coming forward in the next few months, saying, hey, with Muscatine County, could we find $500 or $1,000 to contribute to this effort? And it'll be earmarked for a specific project if we do that,
Okay,
so.
thank you. Matt, you have anything committee-wise? Okay. Next, receive information from county employees. Do we have any county employees that want to address the board? No? No? Bill?
I just wanted to come up and let you know that today we're starting to go live on the Encode financial system. And that'll be drawn out over about 5 weeks. So I don't know each of the steps off the top of my head, but I wanted to let you know that we are moving forward on that and that is going to be going live. It'll replace the Eden system essentially starting today.
Is Encode, is that a different vendor?
No, Tyler's the vendor still. They've just named everything under the umbrella of Encode.
So it's just a rename of their system?
Pretty much. It used to be Encode was more the tax side and Eden was the financial. Now it's just going to be Encode tax or Encode financial.
Okay.
So
And are there significant, I think some of the offices saw some significant upgrades in this.
yeah, it's a different system. It's from what I've heard from other counties is that it's helped reduce some steps. Whereas, you know, something may have been a 9-step process before, it might be a 3-step process now. That it's being handled more on the backside than on the user side. So the offices that'll be affected by this will be doing quite a bit more training over the next 5 weeks, and there will be somebody on site for the next 5 weeks. So
Does this affect all the offices or just pretty much auditor, treasurer, recorder, and admin? Okay,
it doesn't impact the recorder.
okay.
It has small impact on the jail and engineering. The other thing beyond that is we have replaced the video system and added a camera, I believe. We are also now storing archive videos on YouTube for the public to access, and I've put that on the board page over the weekend. So I just wanted to come up and give you those couple of updates.
Okay.
At some point, I'll hopefully make it back up and bring
So
the
if you're
updates.
putting it on YouTube, that means I have to behave myself?
No more than normal.
That's up to you. It's really optional.
We can only hope,
You
right?
can't ask for the impossible.
That's true, Nate.
So,
All right,
any
thank you.
questions or concerns while I'm up
Any
here?
questions, board? No?
All right.
good.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bill,
Number 11, items with the administration office. First is discussion and possible action to approve resolution 05141801 concerning transferring funds from the Rural Services Fund to the Secondary Roads Fund.
I'll move to approve.
Motion by Jeff, second by Matt. Any discussion?
Yeah, what's that amount again? We have it on here. Pardon?
975,000.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. This is a roll call vote. Jeff?
Aye.
Matt? Bob?
Aye.
Nathan?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Motion passes. Next is discussion and possible action to adopt a proposed credit card acceptance policy.
Move to approve.
Motion by Jeff, second by Matt. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. C is review health, dental fund balance as of April 30th, 2018.
Spreadsheet. A little better. Really have anything to say about it unless you have some questions for me.
She's pretty much holding her own.
Yeah, we really just continue to kind of
Ebb and flow a little
ebb
bit.
and flow.
Okay. Everybody good with that?
Yep.
Okay. D would be action authorizing renewal of third-party administrative services with Wellmark for employee health and dental insurance.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Jeff, second by Nathan. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Next is action to set the FY 18-19 health and dental insurance premiums.
I included a spreadsheet or in your packet as well that shows what the current rates are and what the proposed rates are. We had talked about this earlier in the year, and the negotiation with the deputies, which still includes insurance as an item that must be negotiated, is based on these rates. And there is a possibility that the effect of these rate changes may drop our enrollment in Plan A to the point where Walmart requires 10% participation, and we're right on that line right now. So if this rate change pushes 2 or 3 people to move to Plan B or Plan C, then we will drop below the mandatory percentage, and Walmart will require us to drop that plan.
When would that take, I mean, would the folks who are on Plan A now, would they get immediately bumped, or would they get like one more cycle? And what we will do, the next item after this is you're gonna set our enrollment periods. For health insurance, we have an annual enrollment. It's not an open enrollment in that you can add people. It's an annual enrollment in terms of you can decide if you want to switch plans. If we had enough people switch plans at that annual enrollment, then effective July 1st, we would no longer have Plan A. But we'll get that information back in time that if that's going to happen, I can reach out to the folks that are currently on A and just so nobody's caught unaware.
Yeah, no, hopefully there'll be there's adequate time here that I can at least work with the people who are going to be forced off that plan if that happens.
Okay. This is an action item.
So I'll make a motion to accept the.
I got a motion by Jeff. Second by Nathan. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. F is action to set the annual enrollment period for health insurance and open enrollment period for dental insurance for May 23rd, 2018 through June 6th, 2018.
So, second.
Motion by Bob, second by Jeff. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Anything else, Nancy?
I guess I do need to back up a little bit. We didn't talk about it when you did authorize the renewal of the third-party administrative services. Devon had also talked to you guys about the Blue Distinction Program and the Naturally Slim. Kind of from the discussion during that board meeting, I got the impression that there wasn't a lot of interest in doing the Blue Distinction Program. Kind of what it came down to, Jeff summarized it pretty well, is based on the data they have at this point, our cost would be more than the savings that we might receive from people getting onto this program. So my impression from you guys was that perhaps we're not interested in jumping onto that at this time. Would you say that's an accurate?
I don't believe I'm interested at this time.
I didn't see it offering any benefit to the members. I don't.
The other program that she talked about, the Naturally Slim program, I have had some conversation with her about taking a look at that. There's also a wellness program that's very there's very little labor involved for my office. It's more of a online availability of a number of resources to our employees at a relatively low cost. Most entities that implement that Naturally Slim program have kind of done that in conjunction with that website program. And so I've asked Devon to dig into that farther and put together some information and a presentation on that to come back and talk to you guys about. There's no requirement that we have to jump on that July 1st when we do our other renewal. So I've asked her to put together some more comprehensive to come back and talk to you guys about.
Just to clarify, that Naturally Slim, if I recall, it was like $500 and some bucks per participant per year.
It's 500. It was, I believe, $595 for any participant who is successful. If the participant is not successful in terms of the weight loss, during that first, I think it's 12
Otherwise,
weeks.
there's no charge.
Then there's no charge, but
And is that does that go on in perpetuity, or is it a one-time?
it's a one-time thing for that particular employee, is my understanding. Typically, when entities roll that out, they don't roll it out to everybody at once. They offer a program for, I don't know, you pick 20 people, and then you have people indicate an interest, and then you somehow have to decide, how you're going to select the first people to participate if you get more interest than you do, than you have slots for. So
I didn't get a real good feel for exactly what the program was and how it worked.
I agree.
Whether it was education based, they talked about, they talked about coaches and website, and was it education based? Was it, so I don't know where I stand on it.
And that's why I've asked Yvonne to put together something more comprehensive to come back
We were
with.
drinking from a fire hose last week. I mean,
Yeah,
I would agree, a little bit more information, a little in a digestible
Yep.
format, no pun intended, would be good.
okay.
Okay.
So I think we're all kind of in the same place there. I just want to confirm that.
We are already naturally slim.
Anything else then, Nancy?
Nope, I don't have anything else.
Anything else from the board? If there's nothing else, meeting adjourned.